I know I am probably going to have to do some more investigation on that. I'm just going to write.
I just was talking to him because I know some of this. That's why I'm worried because my daughter went into it. It's one of her daughter's friends.
No, it's. Wow.
Okay.
We'll stand in great on us. Yeah. Well, I'll respond tomorrow. I have some more things that I told Anthony.
Okay.
Yeah. That's the way to go.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. And welcome to our, I don't even know what the day is today, April 11th meeting of the Ames Community School District Board of Directors. I will call the meeting to order and entertain a motion to approve the agenda. So moved. Second. Moved by Winfrey, seconded by Franzen. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Passes 6-0. Director Linkaitis, will you please read our purpose statement?
The Ames Community School District commits to equity and access that empowers every individual to reach their full personal and educational potential.
And we are going to begin our meeting this evening with our celebrations and recognitions, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Hawkins.
Good evening. Thank you very much. I'm really excited about this portion of our agenda. We have two great recognitions to honor tonight. Our first is Miss Katrina Williams. Katrina, will you come up here, please? Thank you so much. Ames middle school teacher Katrina Williams was named the Trailblazing STEM Educator. This award, put forth by the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics and Challenger Center, recently recognized 5 K-12 educators that included Miss Williams, who go above and beyond to inspire the next generation of explorers and innovators in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Ms. Williams is nominated by Iowa State University Associate Professor of Aerospace Engineering, Dr. Kristen Rosier, who collaborated with Williams on her STEM outreach. Williams has been an educator for over 28 years. Her enthusiasm for teaching and reaching underrepresented groups is a passion she has shown at Ames Middle School. During the pandemic, she certainly taught her students about PPE and other COVID support programs. She creatively taught them, pardon me. Williams frequently hosts STEM-focused after-school activities, field trips, and career expos. Katrina is truly a genius at connecting real-world STEM careers and innovations to meaningful educational experiences that ignite students' imaginations and inspire them to pursue STEM, said Dr. Rosier. In addition to her exemplary classroom teaching, she goes above and beyond to engage students spanning K-12 outside the classroom. She is truly the embodiment of a trailblazing STEM educator. Please help me in congratulating Katrina Williams. If you have some words you'd like to say?
So this is a trial run for the 30 seconds that I get to say in about 2 weeks. And so if you all embellish these remarks, please, because I'm overwhelmed and I will cry. To every student who trusted me to teach mathematics over the past 25 plus years. To every attendee who came in to do STEM learning on Saturdays, yes, Saturdays. For every 3E and 2E student learner. To every ELL student learner, especially my 6th period since August 2021. To every Connect participant. To every student learner who joined me in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade lunches to be exposed to STEM along with the National Society of Black Engineers. NSBE, great times. To Jules Academy, you know that we recognize that aerospace engineering takes place in land, water, air, and space. We partnered for years to get 3rd graders to post-secondary young females ready to be the living legends, Christine Darden and our beloved late Mary Jackson. Those are my STEM sisters, y'all. Dorothy Vaughn and Katherine Johnson. We learned more about hidden figures and we are determined to be hidden no more. In the midst of every microaggression, micro-insult, and micro-invalidation and other forms of racism as a Black mathematician, I'm happy to tell you, I do what I do to support and find our future STEM leaders of our world. The next creator of the Super Soaker, Lonnie Johnson's of our world. The late Dr. J. Ernest Wilkins Jr., my thesis advisor, the Queen of Catway in chess, up close and personal. Even my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu grandbaby, Ezra, who wants to be a roller coaster engineer. It's possible. He's convinced, and we have learned that Disney supports this. To my husband, Vladimir, who thought it not robbery to store STEM activities. Yes, a box of shuttles, space shuttles, mind you, and lots of books and boxes, and recently the measuring cups from Gaines detergent are stored in abundance somewhere nearby. And to my favorite STEM geniuses, my children, VJ, who is away at college as a cinema, television, emerging media studies major at Morehouse College, and my favorite scholar athlete, Victoria, who is right now at this moment running in a 100 and 200 meter dash. So that is also, you don't know this, but my daughter declared that she will be an astronaut who plays basketball and cooks in space at the age of 4. This moment is for all of you. Surely, and certainly it is surreal for me. It's very surreal. I've spent many years doing this work in STEM, advocacy, diversity, equity, and inclusion, social justice, and apparently there are no plans for me to stop now. I have ventured into the realm of mentorship over the years. Look out, world. There's a future math teacher, a STEM leader coming your way who has been hanging with me and my student learners. They are well prepared to contribute to the innovative STEM bright paths, full speed ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to invite the board if they have anything that they would like to say.
Well, I just want to congratulate you and say how thrilled I was when I saw this news. There just could not be a more deserving educator in our district. We're so proud to have you here, and thanks for all you do for our kids.
Again, congratulations.
We're very proud of you. We do have a second group to honor and award this evening. Very excited to celebrate our state basketball champions. The Ames High School boys team captured the 2022 Iowa High School Athletic Association 4A state championship in dominating fashion. Yes, they did. In a 68-37 win over the Johnston Dragons just before spring break. The Little Cyclones finished the regular season with a 21-3 record and entered the state tournament as the #1 seed and the clear favorite to win the title. Throughout the regular season, the team showcased their defensive and offensive prowess. They often held their opponents to the lower point total of their year, and in their 5 postseason games, they had an average margin of victory of an astonishing 23.2 points. Senior Taman Lipsey also had a remarkable season to cap off his Ames High career. He became only the 5th Ames High boys player to enter the 1,000 point club and became the program's all-time career assist leader. In the championship game, he recorded a rare high school triple-double and was later named Iowa Mr. Basketball, the 3rd Little Cyclone to earn that recognition. This season adds to the legacy of Ames High School boys basketball. This was the 23rd state tournament for the program and the 9th state championship, the most in 4A. Their 3 tournament wins also tallied their all-time total victories to 43, again, most in state history. For head coach Vance Downs, this was his 6th state tournament appearance and 3rd state title in his 18-year tenure. Please help me congratulate our boys basketball champions.
I think they want to shake their hands.
Walk through and shake their hands, that'd be great. Kennedy, if you have a few words you'd like to say.
I would just like to make a few thank yous. First of all, thank you to this great group of kids. Secondly, thank you to the board for all your support. And then thank you for all the terrific teachers and staff members within the school district that have helped these young men in so many numerous ways to get to this point. And then the last thing I have to say is thank you again for supporting all extracurricular activities. Our seniors, every one of these seniors are going to be on a college campus next fall. And they would have got there, but extracurriculars made it a heck of a lot easier, and there's a lot more support, and it is so much appreciated. So again, thank you for everything, and thanks for having us. We had a blast.
Again, board, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Well, I'll just say it was great fun getting to watch you all this season. You represented Ames so well. And, you know, many of you know I have a senior as well, so it's been fun watching some of you grow from kindergarten all the way to this point, and we just can't wait to see what you do next.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And again, let's congratulate our team one more time.
Dismissed.
You sure you don't want to stay?
Want to learn about how school works? Gosh, we have such a great time. Oh, no. Lucas was here to be. Oh,
Yep. It's getting a little low, but I have a refill at home.
It's like I just shook it 27 teenagers.
All right. Well, after that uplifting start to our meeting, we are going to go ahead and move on to our next item, which is our public hearing on the 2022-23 proposed budget. And if we have anyone that would like to speak on the 2022-23 proposed budget, you are welcome to do so. Let's check in our Zoom here. All right, seeing none, I will close our public hearing and we'll move on to our discussion items. The first of which is our board committee update, and we will begin with the equity committee.
We had a great meeting. Actually, it was really awesome. We had Fellows Elementary came and Principal Cole and assistant principal there gave some background on what they've been doing as far as equity learning. And it was a wonderful meeting, really talking about what's going on in the buildings. And then we had a little bit of an equity plan update, which I know, as everybody knows, there's some community feedback going on with that, and that's continuing to develop. But most all of it was hearing about how it's going at the elementary level with a good example.
Thank you. Any questions for equity committee? All right, we'll move on to facilities.
I think the everything I believe is what you need to know is in the minutes from the meeting. I would add that we were a little late getting here because we just got to take Dr. Lawson, obviously our new superintendent, through the building, and it is so amazing to see how it is changing and the parts that are already finished, and just super exciting to see it and see it with him for the first time. Continuing to watch, obviously we've talked about it at past meetings, but just being aware of supply chain challenges because of COVID, but the team continues to work super hard and keep us abreast of any concerns they have moving forward. But again, it was we had I would say a regular update meeting, and but a great tour this afternoon.
Great. Any questions for facilities?
We have heard that the overhead doors are located in Des Moines and that Jerry is considering going and getting them himself. So those doors that have been back ordered are on the way.
So close. All right, the Mental Health Committee did meet on April 6th. We did not turn around the minutes quickly enough to get them attached to the agenda for tonight, so we will report out on that at the next meeting. And Policy Committee.
We met on March 30th, which I actually was not at that meeting. I think Lisa could speak to that one. And then we met also on April 7th. Do you have anything to add about it?
No, everyth's in the minutes.
Yeah, I'd say
That's what I would say.
we've gone through a lot in the past few meetings. And I'll say thank you to staff for making it easy for us to get through all of this policy and walking us through what it all means. But I think it looks like we're making headway. I don't know if we'll ever be finished, right? We just start over again, right? But some good updates and in line with IASB recommendations.
Thank you. And then Teaching and Learning, I sat in for Director Linkaitis for that one, so I'll give a quick update on that. We had discussion about the curriculum review policy, a little bit of discussion on concurrent enrollment offerings, so looking at how we have students participate in dual enrollment classes and PSEO. There's more information about that in the minutes here as well. An update on curriculum materials purchase for social studies and literacy. And then we have our next meeting, or well, they will, I won't be there. They will have their next meeting on April 19th. Questions for Teaching and Learning. And I didn't ask for questions for policy. So any questions on any of the board committees? Or other updates on board committees? Okay, and we did not have anyone signed up to speak on board committees, so we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is our policies for discussion.
I think they're all outlined there. We largely updates. I'm trying to think if there was anything on here that was, is there any, I don't think there's any brand new policies. So
The student school board representative came back to
Yes.
us and we're bringing it back to you, but I'm trying to remember. I think we had looked at if there were any specific changes to eligibility. This is what I'm recalling, Sabrina and Kelly. And so opened that up and maybe clarified some of that.
Yeah, so I would say we wanted to draw the rest of the board's attention to that policy because
Yep.
we had noted that it needed to come back to the committee, but we weren't really clear 100% on what the concern had been. We couldn't flesh that out. So if anyone has questions or concerns on this policy, we would love to have a discussion.
I think the only question I have is when do we anticipate taking, actually getting some students for this? Is this something, because of the application process, we probably want to get Dr. Lawson involved this spring with the process, or is it something we're going to wait a year?
Yeah, I think we were looking at potentially starting it in the fall, which would mean that the application process would need to get rolling pretty soon. Is that?
We were hopeful to get the application out this spring.
Yep.
I think it looks great. I think one thing we had talked about, right, was if we have two, would they be like rotating meetings? Or was that the idea?
And we did not discuss that. I think that could be, something that we determine, doesn't necessarily need to be in policy, but would just be something that we determine as we put that process together.
Yeah, I think the policy as written looks great to me. It's just how soon we can start it and how do we want to do it?
Yeah.
Yes. I do have a question about the use of plural versus singular, because the first sentence of scope of policy says the school board shall invite up to 2 non-voting participants, and then everything else is written as if it's a single representative. So, I mean, I would like to get this passed soon because we need to move on this if at all possible. But I don't know. I mean, it
Yeah, I
sounds
think-
like you all are anticipating inviting just one person for the first year.
Not necessarily. That's something
Okay.
that we could determine as we move through the process. Because I think with student schedules, we were thinking there'd be a benefit in having two,
Okay.
just so that they don't have to come to every single meeting.
Okay.
But yeah, it's just I would say that's just a grammatical thing that we just
We
need
could put
to-
an S in parentheses
Yes,
around
that's
those
what-
participants
yeah.
to give that some
Yeah, it's just
flexibility.
a
if that
grammatic,
would-
we can
okay.
fix that
Okay.
easily.
Okay.
Yep. And then that won't affect our ability to bring it back either.
Okay,
so.
good.
Any other comments on the policies for discussion?
The only thing I would add is that the naming new facilities, that was another one that had come back. We first entertained it, I think it was February, but I could be off on that, and you sent it back to committee, but just want to commend the staff. I think that I think my understanding, well, I know Dr. Vincent, she took it, and there's not, there wasn't an IASD sample, so she really was able to utilize some of the information from the city policy to help build our policy from there. So just appreciate the staff's work on this as we had sent it back to them in February.
All right, if there are no other comments or questions, we will move on to our teaching and learning update. And we'll begin with the 2022-23 school day hours, which will be Dr. Hawkins.
Good evening again. Thanks for the time. My hope in the conversation is to kind of talk us through kind of process-wise, where have we been up to this point in this conversation about school hours? I'm hoping get a few things fixed, if you will, as far as like what are definitive things that we want to prioritize within the process. And I will be making a recommendation based on what I think is our best practice. But I also want to share with you the feedback that we got from our community. So I want to start with the things that, at least in my mind, are fixed points and get direction from the board in case I'm not thinking correctly. So in my mind, the fact that we will hold school for 6 hours and 35 minutes of time for instruction is a fixed point, right? If we were to change that, and I bring that up because I anticipate that later we may get into some conversations about how long does a day go, and when do we start, and when does that impact when we end? And if we did not want to go for 6 hours and 35 minutes, it would impact that part of the conversation, but it would also impact the calendar that we approved a few weeks ago. Because it's approved, in my mind, that's a fixed point. If at some point in the conversation that's not a fixed point for the board, it would be good for me to have clarity on that. The next fixed point in my mind, we haven't discussed as much, and again, it's good to get out there. In my mind, it is the responsible thing to do for our district and our community to save the nearly $330,000+ that we can save by creating a 50-minute length of time between elementary and secondary bus routes. I don't know if the board desires me to go into any kind of detail with that, but briefly, I would say we worked with Durham to figure out if we were to extend the time between those parts of the system, how many routes could we eliminate, and then take that by the number of times that we plan to transport students. And it's a little over $330,000 worth of savings. As we think about budget for next year, that's a pretty significant amount of money. And so therefore, in my mind, that's a fixed point. Again, if that's not a fixed point for the board, I would benefit from that clarity. Okay, so at least again, in Jeff's mind, given those two fixed points, where does that leave us, right? If we desire to get to 50 minutes of split between our elementary and our secondary systems, there's a couple of different ways that we could do this. And we discussed this as a director's team prior to putting the proposal out to the community. One way would be to simply ask our secondary students to go a little bit earlier, right? From 7:50 to 7:40, and our elementary students to go a little bit later from 8:30 to 8:40. And if we went just this way by 10 minutes each, we would accomplish that split. However, when we look at the primary body of research that's out there about sleep cycles of our teens and the impact of sleep on improving student achievement, it doesn't align with that. And desiring to be a district office staff that provides the board information and recommendations based upon research, we decided to put a proposal out for our community that was grounded more strongly in that research base. I do want to take a moment to say here, though, in that process of feedback, we have a great research-oriented community, and I did have an elementary parent give me a link to a research article produced by the APA in 2014 that suggested in that one study that longer sleep for elementary students is beneficial to their achievement as well. So I don't want to present this as if it's a one-sided research approach. There's some research out there that would suggest later starts are good for all. At least the one study that I'm aware of currently. So after looking at the research as a team, getting to those fixed points about time and money savings, we thought, yep, let's put a proposal out to our community. We had done so in the spring of 2020, but there were no specifics with it. And so there was a pretty good chance that the feedback may be a little bit different. We also didn't offer people, as I recall, the opportunity to provide comments or feedback that were aggregated for the board. And so one of the things that I want to share tonight is what did our community have to say about this proposal? Again, the proposal was to switch those start times to have our elementaries go first in the day, right? Here, let me double check this. The proposal specifically was to have our elementary start at 7:40 a.m. And be released at 2:45. To have our high school start at 8:30 and our middle school start at 8:40 to be released then at 3:35 and 3:45 respectively. So I don't know, Amy, if you can pull up the attachment, but I want to talk our board through a little bit of the feedback that our community gave. All right. Hopefully you all have access to this and can, okay, great. Okay, so there were 1,755 total respondents to the survey. Not every respondent indicated which group they were associated with, and not every respondent indicated yes, I support it, or a no, I don't. So ironically, of the 1,755 respondents, exactly 1,737 identified what group they were associated with, and exactly 1,737 also identified a yes or no. But I want to be clear to the board, they're not the same 1,737 people. They vary by about 8 to 10. Okay, so you can see there who responded to the survey primarily. Right, and haven't had to do this before, but I need to. Yep, that just happened. Okay, so you can see our secondary students had 606 responses. Elementary parents were the next most with 422. Secondary parents of 416. Our staff, elementary staff at 102 and secondary staff at 143. And then we had 48 community members or others. I would want the board to know that the survey was offered in English, Chinese, Spanish, Arabic, and Vietnamese, and all 1,755 responses were submitted in English. So there just simply weren't responses in those other languages to report about. So when the question was asked, can you support the proposal? You can see there that there is a difference of 23 votes from the 1,737 people that voted. So literally a 50.7 to 49.3 margin, with 23 more people saying no, they did not support the proposal than the 857 people who said they did support the proposal. So again, I will own my perspective, a pretty much 50-50 split on the feedback. I wanted to break that down for you from a secondary. So in that next page, you'll see from a secondary student or elementary parent, how many said yes and how many said no. Ironically, from a community's perspective, exactly 24-24. And then I thought it might be constructive for both the district to get a sense of what are some of those concerns, and for the board to see some of the concerns of different groups. And so there were 946 comments written. I've gone through every one of those line by line and tried to categorize them thematically for why. Why do you support it, or why do you not support it? I would want the board to know that there were a handful of comments that didn't make it into this list because they were things like, yes, finally, but didn't really tell me why, or you're insane. Again, it doesn't tell me why, it just tells me how they feel. So I knew how they felt, but it didn't give me a problem to solve. I suppose if I was insane, there's a problem to solve, but it didn't lead me to anything constructive So those comments didn't make it here. So what I tried to represent for the board were some of those comments that potentially gave us ways to understand why people were feeling the way they did, or things that we could potentially resolve. I will acknowledge some of the things are hard to resolve, like it's dark out, or this is going to impact my work schedule. Those are difficult for the district to resolve, but I do think it's responsible for us to know what those concerns are and do the best we can. Maybe we can work with a city on lighting, or maybe those concerns would tell us we don't want to go in this direction. But I tried to be as thorough as I could in giving you all of the data that would help us understand why people were feeling the way they felt. So I'm just going to pause for a minute and let you read through that. And then if we could scroll down, maybe we're still letting the audience read, I apologize. I put here what was proposed, and then I also created some options that were grounded in the feedback that was most frequent. So for example, a lot of folks said comments like, I really appreciate that we're using research and I support this research for our secondary students, but I'd really like to see our elementary students start later as well. That's a common theme amongst many different groups, right? Or some people in their comments just wrote times, 7:45 to 2:45, right? Like they were suggesting things. And so I did try to create alternatives, but I am going to be clear about my proposal to you so that you can then debate that and determine where you want to go with it. So based upon what I see as a 50-50 split in the survey, I want to make sure people don't feel as if I'm being dismissive of their feedback, because I think it's really important that we have that feedback, but I don't know how to ground a decision in something that has a 23 vote difference between 1,700 people. To me, that's not going to be the factor or the line that I would use to make a recommendation on a decision. So my recommendation is going to be more grounded in the givens, 6 hours and 35 minutes, $330,000 worth of savings. And I am going to propose to the board, I'm going to recommend to the board that we follow the largest body of research about secondary going later and move our secondary times later. So what I'm proposing to the board is what's captured in that top box. But I did try to provide alternatives in case the board felt like that was not tenable based upon the feedback.
So Jeff, the survey didn't ask people what they thought of another alternative to save the same amount of money, right?
That is correct. Yeah,
so it could have impacted people's decisions if they knew an alternative was that high school starts at 7:40 and elementary starts even later than it does now, for us to have the $338,000 savings. So
maybe,
I mean, you may have had a different outcome.
And if we wanted to, we could certainly put this out.
No, I'm not suggesting that. I'm
Okay,
just
sorry.
suggesting that if people were informed
Knew that it
there-
was 740 as an
that
alternative.
in order to save the money, these are the two choices,
Mhm.
you might have had more in favor of your proposal. So,
I see.
yeah, so I'm not sure that the survey really adds any information.
Well,
I'd
I'd
also, go ahead.
I would say it does add information that there is a lot of resistance among elementary school parents for this, to this proposal, and a lot of concern about kids getting up early. I have a couple of questions. First, the really small question, a small thing in the detail, but I'm curious to hear the explanation. All of the proposals that you put out have middle school starting 10 minutes later or after, either a 10-minute stagger between middle and high school. Can you explain why that's necessary?
Yes, I can. Thank you for the question. In working with our transportation department, they've indicated that's the stagger they need. If we're going to have secondary kind of on one half of the equation and elementary on the other, that's the stagger they need, they feel, in order to make both of those drop-offs successfully.
Okay, and then thanks. Then the second question is, what are the arguments against starting everything later?
Well, I'm going to have to presume, right, project a little bit. As Director Linkaitis pointed out, we didn't actually ask that question. However, based upon the feedback that was given in this, some of the feedback about later end times entailed things like, I'm worried that kids are going to miss out on class if they're involved in athletics or activities and that activity has to leave. Another thing was, well, my older child provides care for my younger child after school, and this is going to either increase costs for our family or it's going to disrupt that routine. There were some concerns about this is going to push everything back, right? So if kids get to practice later, then they're going to run later, then homework's going to be done later, and then they're going to go to bed later. Like, this is just going to push everything further into the evening. Those are probably the strongest themes of concerns when it came to a later end time. And so I would project that that might be the concerns we would hear about pushing everything back.
So I kind of, this isn't really a question. I just kind of want to throw this out there as something for us to think about. The secondary students are really overrepresented in this sample, right? Because the students and the parents got to make a choice. If you exclude just the students and count the parents, for example, it actually shifts slightly in favor of no. And so that's a little bit concerning to me because, I mean, really you've got, you know, let's say every student and their parent and us, right? Or we could exclude the parents and just count the students. But, and so I'm very concerned about it. I think the other thing, and I don't know, I guess kind of what your thoughts are. This is not a right answer, but we do live in a place where we have not enough after school care already. And that's my biggest concern, I think, with this. I think in principle and research and all of that, I'm totally supportive. I could make it work, but I'm very concerned about the after school care situation. So have we communicated with care providers about, is there any ability to increase capacity? Do we have any sense of what this might look like?
I'd love to tell you something that would relieve that, but what I'm going to tell you is that 3 of the respondents on the community portion of the survey, it stated, I am a care provider in the community and have been so for quite some time, and I'm concerned about the demand, the lack of options people have, and the demand that this is going to place on an already thin resource. So again, I'd love to tell you, like, oh yeah, this is,
I thought maybe
people have said I'm going to make a change, but that's, again, that was 3 responses.
But seeing that that's a concern of elementary parents.
Right, but it was a common theme of concern for elementary parents, yes.
If we were to look at the percentages, 60% of respondents from the middle school support, or from secondary parents and students support the change, whereas 76% of elementary school respondents oppose the change. So it's a pretty strong.
So one thing I'm going to point out, and this is not to call it out because I did share this with Dr. Hawkins. If you're a parent that has children in multiple levels, you couldn't reflect that in your response. Right. So when I went in there, I had to decide if I was going to answer as a secondary parent or as an elementary parent. So I think we need to be careful when we're looking at this data, conclusions we may make, because it's not representative of all of our families.
I was going to say the same thing. When I went in and filled it out, I assumed I would be able to do it twice. So I filled it out as a secondary parent, and then when I went back in to do it as an elementary, you had to be logged in through Google, and you could only fill it out once. Yeah. So I was only able to fill it out as a secondary parent. So I suspect that we have families that have kids at multiple levels who only filled it out once.
Well, and I think they should only get to fill it out once, right? It's just a matter of whether they're counted as elementary or secondary. Because if you said yes,
Well, you weren't allowed to select both. You had to pick one.
Right,
Either
so you're
secondary or
either
elementary.
represented as elementary or secondary.
Right.
Yeah, which is how we divide it up, but
There were folks, I'm sorry to interrupt your conversation. There were folks who said like, I have kids in multiple parts of the system and I'm super supportive of this. However, I'm worried about this aspect, or I'm an elementary parent and a secondary parent as well. I'm not sure that I like this, but I will tell you, I think it would be good for my, so there were in the comments, people tried to represent that thinking.
Yes, I think I would just echo what Elisa said, that I wouldn't want to rely too heavily on this data as an exact representation of the community.
Well,
I think
we
but-
still do have over 1,000 respondents at the secondary level and about 400, little over 400 respondents at the elementary level, which suggests regardless of how we, I mean, it is possible that there's error in the data, certainly, in terms of how people identify themselves. And also we have substantial overweighting of secondary as opposed to elementary school
I
students.
think something to look at in the data too, and I think you reading through it, I think could get to my question. If we flipped it and did the survey, I am guessing we would see similar results, maybe with secondary, highly unlikely to support having secondary go 10 minutes early. Because then you'd have secondary parents saying that, right? To me, what the data actually says is the people that are going to have to go first don't really like that. And no matter how you flip it, that's going to be true. And to me, the weighting where the elementary has higher number of no right now is because of the families that don't have kids in both, because then they're just going to go with the one that's early. And so to me, I'm more interested, I think, in the comments that were down below.
Yeah.
And those impacts. What did you observe in the comments that give you the most pause or concern with this model? The classic thing like we do in the equity problem solving thing of who's not benefiting from this? Like where's the segment of the community that's going to have some problems? I mean, to me, it seemed like the childcare after school. The thing I would say about childcare after school and schedules is I don't know about everybody else, but my schedule in Ames and everything I do in Ames is based upon the school schedule is the first thing that's fixed and everything else kind of moves around relative to it.
Did that happen with our 30-minute adjustment this semester? I guess maybe would be a question to know if that would be likely again.
I guess like the example I use is like, well, this is a personal one. My wife works for the university, right? So she always has her start time at her job at the university based upon when the kids get dropped off at school. When it goes to summer, it flipped by 45 minutes. So whatever time school started, that would be her office's start time for the university, right?
I worry that that's a certain group of people and types of jobs that have that flexibility, though.
That's why I'm wondering what the comments showed with that.
So I did see some general themes, and I'll try to very directly answer your question. First, I would want you to know, and maybe you would presume this, people who said no had more to say in their comments than people who said yes. So it was very common for a yes, I support this proposal, to have have no comment, or to have a comment again like, it's nice, this is great, or I approve of this, or I wish you would have done this last year when my daughter was still in high school. But the no's were much more descriptive as to why. So I want to give you that context so that if you look through and you're like, man, there's 90 people that commented this, or there's 43 and there's only 3 or 4 that, well, people had a lot more to say when they didn't support the proposal. To answer your question directly, Dr. Bierbaum, the thing that was most concerning to me, and it was pretty prevalent amongst the groups, was the concern about safety in the morning. There was one comment about safety in the afternoon, like, hey, if our high schoolers get out after our elementary kids, then they're going to have to learn how to drive a little bit differently. They're going to need to be more cautious than they've had to be in the past. I found that to be an interesting safety-based comment, but the safety of our students is always going to come first and foremost for me. And so safety-based concerns were the ones that I found myself most concerned with. Most of those safety concerns were, I think, a child walking to a bus or waiting for a bus stop or walking to school in the dark at that time of the morning is problematic. I must admit, I don't know to what extent our students are currently walking in the dark, but I do know that even during the winter months, by 8:30, there's a pretty good amount of light in the sky. So that's the best answer I can give you as to the one that I found most concerning.
Okay, I guess as a follow-up to that maybe, and just to get my two questions out of the way. I found alternative 2 rather interesting in that the idea of still having the high school later, it gives us the opportunity to flip high school activities to before school and eliminate some of the concerns there were about having high schoolers go later. I just wanted to hear you had mentioned that earlier, if that's one of the things that concerned you about that, is that high schoolers would have activities maybe later that would then drive everything back. But it seems like there's actually an opportunity there that you could flip some things a little bit. But what's your thinking there?
Just to be really clear, I want to make sure I'm communicating this well. That was a concern expressed by some of the groups. It's not a concern I hold. I don't say that to be flippant about the concerns other people express, but I've watched this transition happen from a secondary building going from earlier in the day to later in the day with previous systems I've been a part of, being a high school principal through that change, watching my own children progress through that change. And so that's an isolated example. I don't want to overly influence the board based on just my personal example, but I don't share that concern of, oh, it's going to go later, because my personal experience is that our teenagers stay up till midnight no matter when they get done with practice. Employers who want teenagers to work at their jobs are going to adjust the shifts that they need the teenagers to be at their jobs. And so my experience would not echo the concerns that I've seen, but I don't want to invalidate that those were those concerns.
So then maybe the question really is, alternative 2 seems like it addresses some of the elementary concerns that you had said the community mostly had, but it's not your recommendation. So what's the difference between alternative 2 and your recommendation? In your mind, what makes the other one better?
Well, that's a great question. I wasn't sure, quite frankly, whether it would be wise to put alternatives here for the board to consider. I guess where I ground my recommendation in is it's what I've got the most information about, right? I know that it's maybe not what, I agree with you. I think there's some attractive things about some of the other options, but because I haven't asked that question and I don't know how exacerbated are some of those concerns going to be about even a later release, I tried to ground my recommendation. Again, for me, it really comes back to when I've got large segments of our community that think this is a horrible idea and large segments of our community that think this is the best idea they've heard in years and don't know why we haven't done it sooner. I don't know how to take a 50-50 split and ground my recommendation to the board in that data. And so I'm trying to align it to the research base that I believe I understand best. I would agree with you that second option also accomplishes that.
Yeah, and that's the reason I had asked, is because it seems like it addresses some of the concerns you said the community.
Yeah, what I don't know is what does 405 do to our community as opposed to, as opposed to 345. What does that 20 minutes do to our community? I didn't really ask them, so I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you know of, I know this has been a topic that has been brought up every year since I've been on the board. So that's 6.5 years. So, and I know it's a topic that school districts have talked about for years. Do you know of other school districts that have made the change and the result of, have they kept with that change? And I'm talking flipping times. That was a question I got from a community member is, have other school districts done this? And I think they have, but I'm curious.
Yeah. I prepared myself to speak intelligently about what are other places doing. Unfortunately, I don't know that I can say I know which ones flipped or flipped recently. Obviously, I have a personal experience with Ankeny where I can talk pretty intelligently about what happened there and the adjustments that were made in our community. I can tell you, statistically speaking, there was no significant change in our attendance rate from one to the other. Maybe like first hour attendance rate or tardies was a little bit better. ACT scores or some of those broader assessment pieces remained pretty constant and high. And so we saw good results. And so again, it's a pretty isolated example. I don't even know if it's fair to ask you to draw conclusions based on that, but again, if the board wanted, I could try to research other schools that have made the switch.
Is it a trend that you've been seeing in schools to do this, to start the
Yeah, it's
secondary
really,
later?
it's a really interesting question. So what I see so I thought it might be wise to be able to speak to the board about our neighboring Story County schools. What are they doing? And then some of the other schools that would be in the CIML, right? And so when I look at our neighboring schools, many of them, I hope I'm presenting this the right way, are small enough that they're just all the same time, right? So like, for example, Gilbert, their high school is before their elementary and middle school by 5 minutes, 8 to 8:05. They have a 5-minute span for all their grade levels. And Ballard, it's 8 o'clock to 3 o'clock, no matter what building you're in the system, right? In Nevada, again, their high school and middle school do go a little bit earlier by 5 minutes, 8:15 to 8:10. Right. And so those systems are able to simply accomplish transporting everybody at the same time. Now, when we look at the metro or CIML schools, larger systems, that's when you start to see the difference in the amount of time between those busing routes. So for example, Iowa City, I think sometimes we see ourselves somewhat comparable to Iowa City. Iowa City has their high school go 55 minutes later than their elementary. Ankeny has their high school go 30 minutes later. Johnston has their high school go 55 minutes earlier. I do know that right now that's a conversation at their board table, but as of today, they go 55 minutes earlier. But I guess my point is, when we start to see those larger systems, you start to see that span between, and just in due diligence to the feedback that we got, some of the feedback was, man, that split between those times makes it really hard for me as a parent to drop off my elementary kid or my secondary kid and then have all this time before I have to drop off my other kid. So I want to be true to the feedback given there too.
So one of the findings from psychological research that's really consistent is what we call loss aversion, which is that people respond to loss much more strongly than they respond to gains. So if you tell somebody they're going to you have a 50 chance, I'm going to enroll you in a lottery and you have a 50% chance of losing $100 and a 50% chance of gaining $100, your expected value is 0, but you're going to care a lot more about losing that $100. So I think that it's really clear that loss aversion is here, and that what people are worried about losing is time, and especially what people value is time in the morning, I think. And so whoever's losing time in the morning is going to feel it really strongly. And I think elementary school it seems pretty clear from everything I have heard and seen that elementary school parents are really, really worried about losing time in the morning. And also, I think they're also worried about, bedtimes. There are elementary school kids who sleep 11 hours a night, and how it affects the family structure if, the elementary school kid has to take a bus in the morning. And what does it mean for a kid to sleep 11 hours a night?
Yeah, I would agree. There were comments from respond. Again, there were 946 comments. So there, if you can imagine the range of support and concern, I probably read it. But there were comments about, I'm concerned about, based on this, what bedtime might look like and how early I have to get my kid to bed. And my elementary child needs a lot of sleep too, right?
Yeah, and I think that's where we come to the place of, it's just, you can't win, somebody is in that position unless we could start them at the same time, which we can't do it.
Well, that's why I started with the givens.
Yeah.
So Dr. Hawkins, and maybe you can tell us if you have, I'd asked Deanie if the alternatives have been ran across Durham. I'd be concerned, especially on alternative 2, that we might not have enough bus drivers for those elementary routes with the activity routes, because we have far more elementary routes than we do middle and high school routes. So I
have not. No,
okay, so that might be a concern with alternative 2 that we need to keep in mind, because we already have difficulties with that gap now and not having enough drivers. So,
but they all have 15-minute gaps, right? So, but you're thinking moving I'm
But
sorry, I'm
the-
confused about what
The activities, the athletics, they
Right.
start late in the afternoon. So if elementary is running at 3:05, my guess is we're gonna have a lot of activity routes going at that same time, and we may not have enough drivers. Because we have far more elementary routes than we do.
Yeah.
So right now, under the proposal, if Amy can move it back up, elementary gets out at 2:45, which they would have all those routes ran and back really before any high school or middle school activity routes would start. That'd be, and they may be able to do it. I don't know. I asked Deanie if we'd ran it by him, but we might want to check with that.
No, I think it's a great suggestion, and I also wonder if one of our things that's given is that we do want to try to capture that savings. To what extent does that alternative number 2 counteract that? That's a good catch, Chris.
So Dr. Hawkins, are you wanting to see consensus from the board or just questions and things tonight,
No, I
and we'll
just
bring
wanted
it
to
back?
I wanted the opportunity, so
Okay.
thank you. I wanted the opportunity to kind of give a process update. I guess I would want to know this. If the 2 things that I've said are not a given, I would appreciate that feedback, because if we said, no, we think that 30-minute split that we have now is very appropriate, and that's what we wanted. We want to prioritize that over the $330,000 of savings, then that changes quite a bit of the conversation and what the proposals are. Or if we say, no, actually, we want to cut down on some of those by only going to school for 6 hours and 25 minutes a day instead of 6 hours and 35 minutes. Again, that changes the calculus a little bit. And so if those 2 are not givens, that I would want feedback on in order to bring a better option to the board.
I'm only one board member, but I think that 338,000 savings is really important because we have a budget shortfall this year and we have to find the money somewhere. And this keeps it out of the classroom. So speaking for me, that is not negotiable, that is fixed. But I'm one member of the
Yeah, I
board.
understand. Thank you.
I would add to it that the 6 hours and 35 minutes is also because changing that changes the calendar.
Which we've already approved, so,
Yes.
yep.
Or the amount of instructional hours that we
Yeah.
offer children.
Yeah. Thank you.
I would just echo them. Yes, I agree with both of those premises. I also think that in the abstract, it's better to move high school to later. And also I am really concerned about what's happening at the elementary school. I'm attracted to an alternative 2, but I would obviously, we would need to make sure that it would fit with our cost savings.
I'm similar to Amy, Erica. I'm supportive of the constants. The thing that makes me interested in alternative 2 is because we have the daylight savings time switch happening too.
Right.
Which is going to have a dramatic impact that nobody's ever had data on.
Yeah.
With kids in the morning. So to me, that one seems interesting.
Yeah.
But not my
No
decision.
one asked us.
I'll agree. I agree with the fixed points. I think it's just a question of which schedule is going to work best for our community. And in a perfect world, I would just say, yes, your proposal is great. The after school care thing is what I'm really concerned about and what kind of impact that's going to have on families. Maybe there's enough adjustment. A lot of the emails I've had that's been the concern. So
And I've just wondered if the proposed time, if it eliminates the before school care, so there is only one time that is, I mean, I was thinking about it when I was dropping off elementary kids, that would that then remove that need for that before school care?
I think you usually need more after school care though, right?
In terms of cost, which is a concern that we heard.
Yeah,
Cost
and
to
there are many more
families,
parents.
it might end up being similar if they're
That's
not
what I'm
paying for
wondering.
before school care. Just availability potentially for families who are currently not utilizing after school care. For example, like my students are picked up by their older siblings. So would there be families that might just increase demand for that? Yeah.
I will say that was a comment in the feedback as well. A handful of comment obviously didn't make the top 4 in anyone, but like this would be great because this means I don't have morning childcare was a part of that feedback.
Gotcha.
Well, I appreciate the presentation and the options that you provided and all of the discussion. And folks, if you have additional questions or things that you want to send to Dr. Hawkins, feel free to do that. And then we'll look forward to hearing more.
Sounds good. I'll look into that option number 2, find out whether it's feasible from a transportation standpoint and whether it cuts into our cost savings. And if there's other things that I can be doing to put us in the best position possible to make a decision. I do appreciate the feedback about those constants. That's really helpful. And we'll figure out something. And my goal is that this is done thoroughly enough and publicly enough that this is the last time we have the conversation. We land in something that works for our community and then we go.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I know, we'll probably get additional emails even now, just talking about alternative 2. There are going to be folks who are going to have concerns about that change as well. So I think, it comes down to what we can do with the resources that we have that makes the most sense with the research base. So I appreciate you presenting that.
Not a problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Sorry, Erin, I lost my spot here. Thank you. Okay. Description of curriculum adoption cycle and process.
Hi, good evening. I wanted to share with you just a little bit tonight about some tools that the Teaching and Learning Department has been using in our curriculum review cycle. In the next couple of board meetings, you're going to hear from social studies and literacy teachers about some recommended texts that come at the end of their process. So I wanted to just tonight give you kind of like a big picture process update. So one of the attachments, if you're going to click on that attachment, the attachment sort of represents the end of the really deep dive into the standards and into research and into sort of our equity work that curriculum teams are doing as they go through the curriculum review cycle. So I'll kind of talk you through the different parts of the process by using this tool. So what you see on the first page in red are our understandings about what are the best practices in terms of looking at our curriculum through kind of a critical conscious equity-minded way, right? So the Teaching and Learning Board Committee has been working on, and I think it'll be coming to you in policy soon, about the definition of curriculum and what does that mean if we're taking equity and putting that at the center. So that'll be coming, but this work kind of stems from that. So we've worked with a couple of different groups, including the Midwest Plains Equity Institute. A few of us got to go on one of their curriculum retreats, and that really helped us think things through as well. This is a draft of a rubric then that we've been using to try to screen some instructional materials. So this is kind of answering the question, what does it mean to look for equity when you're looking at materials? And you'll see some statements in there about representation, about different modes of learning, different ways of being and honoring learning, and space for co-creation and student voice and choice. So this is a draft, like I said. So if you are looking at it and you have feedback, definitely reach out to myself or any of the coordinators because we've been kind of playing around. It's gone through a couple different versions. This rubric happens to be the one, that we were using with the 8th grade social studies teachers this year. So that's the first layer. So it used to be when we did curriculum reviews that this was at the end. So we would go through the whole process and then we had a committee that would sort of say, oh yes, it looks good. And we would look at some things, maybe it was the multicultural gender fair committee, but it wasn't at the center. So that's kind of what we flipped this year is we put this at the center, started there and said, okay, these are the best materials from an equity-based lens, right? Using this, then we kind of looked at the next stages. So if you look at the next color, I think it's blue, those are the best practices. So the teachers in that field went to conferences and they did readings, did different learning to figure out what is it that we value, what are the best practices in this field for our kids. So this was the middle school social studies team, and then each grade level kind of tweaked it. And what you'll see on this particular example is the C3 framework and the inquiry process, right? So those, we're really looking for a set of materials that really supports kids engaging in inquiry and deep learning, right? And then taking action at the end. So you'll see those statements there. So again, we screen the materials to say, do they match these requirements that we have? And then the last section on there is the standards. So maybe, if you've been on board for a while, you've probably heard us talk about the essential standards process, really trying to figure out what are the most important things that we want our students to know and be able to do before they leave a particular course. And it would be really nice if our instructional materials helped us accomplish those things. So at each grade level, we have a section on the rubric around the standards for that grade level, right? So do they have resources that will support these things? So one thing that you'll see as we go through the middle school especially is that Iowa chose to write our own standards in social studies. And so you'll see that in some grade levels, we could find sets of materials. So 8th grade, for example, is early U.S. history. Lots of states have standards around early U.S. history. That worked out really well. 7th grade, you're going to get to hear the teachers got to be really creative and flexible in their thinking because the 7th grade standards don't align really well to nationally published resources. So we had some different opportunities to be creative in how we did things. So typically you'd see us maybe recommend a series over grade levels. And when you see social studies, you're going to notice like, gosh, that's different in 7th grade than it is in 6th and 8th grade. And why might that be? So that's just the point is we've really tried to be specific about what do the teachers need who are teaching that individual grade level. So that's why we have kind of 3 chunks broken out in the rubrics. So that's kind of the process that we've gone through over the last year. Really, these groups started, if you remember, back in 2019, 2020, and then it got interrupted. So we're still finishing from that process. So if you have questions at this point, I'd be happy to answer.
So this looks really great. I'm excited to see what comes out of it.
Yeah.
Excited to dive into the materials. So you have, so these rubrics have different numbers of points and different categories. Are you thinking that they will be weighted according to the number of points, or are we going to be looking at things, I mean, sort of not summing all the points across all of the different categories at equity and standards and best practices and all of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we've been doing in practicality is now not giving like a total final score. Okay. So we've been looking at the equity section and noticing, gosh, there are not a lot of published things that meet all of our dream state on this equity rubric, right? Mm-hmm. So it's almost like at this point, we've tried a couple different things with different groups, but mostly it's been which one is doing sort of the best that we can do, right? Mm-hmm. So there's nothing that's getting 3s down the line. If we could publish that, we would all make a lot of money probably, but we haven't found it yet. We've gotten some things that are much better than I expected to find. So I was pleasantly surprised by some things that were out there, but nothing is perfect. So we've kind of used that as a first filter. Are there super problematic things that are happening in this textbook or this resource? If it is, we're just going to put it off to the side. Luckily, we didn't get to a place where we had to put everything off to the side, but we did have a conversation about what happens if we have to put everything off to the side. But there are some things, like I said, that we were pleasantly surprised about. The best practices section we use to sort of also then screen and have the teachers go through and say, do you see evidence of this? Is it supporting? Because the inquiry cycle is really different than your traditional textbook, read a chapter, answer a question, right? So you're looking for primary sources, secondary sources, teaching kids to ask questions, write their own questions, those sorts of things. Because that is a national framework, there have been resources developed in that way. So we were able to find some of those things. And then are they emphasizing the standards sort of worked as the standards that we need kind of worked as an additional layer, right? Is this kind of the right match? So we were able to give scores, and it was more of a, how are we using this rubric as a tool to find common ground with each other when we're talking about the materials? Did you see this? Where did you find that? I didn't see this. Those sorts of things, rather than saying this is the one right score and this is what its score will be.
Do you tailor the criteria within each row to the grade level?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. The front rubric, not necessarily. Okay. No, the equity rubric was
part
pretty
not.
standard.
Yep, best practices. best practices you do tailor to each grade level?
Yep, so we had the 6th through 8th grade, for this is a social studies example, so I'll just keep talking about social studies. Meet and talk about what are the best practices in middle school social studies. But the way the state has laid out our inquiry standards, it's slightly different for 6th graders who are just beginning to engage in that inquiry versus like by 8th graders, we expect them to be able to write some of their own supporting questions. So there's a couple of the wordings on the lines that are just slightly different from 6th to 8th grade, but the general philosophy of the inquiry cycle is across those 3 grade levels. But we met with the teams of teachers and they were able to drive a lot of the work in those bottom 2 sections, not in the equity section as much.
Okay. Do you find that certain materials score highly on all these criteria? I mean, it just it may be my own bias, but I would expect that materials that do well on many of these multicultural and culturally responsive categories also do well in stimulating inquiry.
Yes, we found one that's pretty good.
Okay.
The problem was in the standards alignment because we wrote our own.
Oh, yeah.
In that 7th grade year was especially dicey.
So when you're using this, just to help me understand, are you using this looking at like all of the materials that are being used for 8th grade social studies, or is it like you use this for the textbook and then use this for like a supplemental thing? Or
yeah, that's a great question. We kind of, as a teaching and learning team to screen them, we each, there were a couple instances where we all looked at the same grade level and we each took a different unit. When we were trying to learn the rubric to see, is this going to work for us? We would all score the same unit to see how did you interpret this? How did I interpret this? But really, we tried to go as deep as we could. What I think is a fair criticism of any screener tool, rubric, curriculum review, you never know it as well until you teach it, right? Like we're going to have to try it out. We're going to have to see what works. There's going to be pieces of it that the teachers are going to tell us this works really well. And there's going to be pieces that the teachers are going to be like, can I please throw this out? This is horrible. I didn't know what this was, right? It's just part of that implementation. So we have to be flexible and figuring out and giving teachers space to say, yep, this is working. This is meeting my kids' needs and helping them meet the standards and giving them space to say, yeah, no, this is not what we thought it was.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Erin, you mentioned a couple of times that there were a few pleasant surprises that you had. Can you elaborate on 1 or 2 of those?
Sure. So one of the things that I wasn't sure what we would find is in the visual representation. So when I've been hearing about social studies materials, you hear a lot about like literally folks written into the margins, right? Or you hear like, oh yes, this group is here, but they're off to the side, or some problematic language or some topics not being covered at all. And we did see books like that. So I'm not saying they're not out there, but we were also able to see some texts that were really more inclusive, that didn't maybe just center one narrative and had lots of different kinds of text. They also, another thing I expected to see was maybe we had more secondary sources. So instead of folks who actually had a lived experience, we had somebody writing about somebody else's lived experience. But they've, I think, come a long way in how they're centering voices and more diverse authors. So I think that's was a pleasant surprise that I had.
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Erin. And we did not have anyone sign up to speak as part of our public forum. I will go ahead and read our statement on public comments. Residents of the district, students attending the district, parents or guardians of students attending the district, and district staff members may address the board about any topic relevant to the district, whether on our current agenda or not. Those who wish to speak must sign up at the beginning of the meeting. Speaker participation is limited to 3 minutes once per item. The views and opinions of citizens addressing the board do not necessarily reflect those of the board, district administration, or staff. Speakers are to remember that Iowa law prohibits the board from discussing specific employees, students, or their performance. Student speakers will state their name and school. Others will state their name and address. And since we did not have anyone sign up, I will go ahead and close our public forum. And we will move on to our consent agenda, and I'll entertain a motion.
I move the board approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Moved by Beerbaum, seconded by Franzen. Superintendent Vincent?
Yes. Once again, our community continues to show their generosity and would like to acknowledge with appreciation gifts from Shawnee Silverthorne, Karen Knott, Cargill Incorporated, the Northminster Presbyterian Church, 2 different donations, and 2 different anonymous donors. And these gifts were cash as well as art supplies, and they benefit our elementary schools, our middle school, Backpack Buddies program, the Hope Pantry, and the Lunch Hero program.
Thank you. All right, it was moved by Beerbaum, seconded by Franzen to accept the consent agenda. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Passes 7-0. Moving on to action items, we'll begin with the 2022-23 proposed budget.
I move the board adopt the 2022-23 budget as presented.
Second. Moved by Franzen, seconded by Winfrey. Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Passes 7-0. The 2022-23 school fees.
I move the board approve the 2022-23 school fee schedule as presented.
Second.
Moved by Linkaitis, seconded by Beerbaum. Discussion? All those in favor, oh, go ahead.
So I'm not sure that this is something that we can do at this point, given where we are in terms of gathering data. I remain concerned about SAT, PSAT, and AP testing and the equity issues that we identified. And I know that we're going to be talking about this, that there's going to be some discussion of this later on, I believe, in the meeting, but I would like to see us think about this. Sorry.
Dr. Hawkins, you want to report back on what you were able to find out?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Happy to do it. All right, so I believe some of the questions asked were how many seniors qualify for free introduced lunch? The answer for this year, 89 students from our senior class qualify for free lunch and 5 qualify for reduced. So then subsequently, how much would it cost for us to pay for AP tests for seniors who qualify for free reduced lunch? The quick answer is $3,552 based upon the number of students who qualify for free reduced lunch who have also signed up for AP tests. So we have all that data, thanks to staff who took the time to do that. The answer is, again, $3,552, and this is just being thorough. This is not a question you asked, how much would it cost for us to pay for all students in the senior class AP testing? $44,640. How much would it cost to pay for ACT tests for seniors who qualify for free introduced lunch? It's a little more complicated at this point. We have first of all, I want you to know that the ACT costs $60. If you're not taking the writing portion, it costs $85 if you are taking the writing portion. So I went back to last year. The number of seniors who took the ACT last year, which is 137. That's down from 198 the year before, and I hypothesize that that's likely due to our Asian institutions saying that you no longer need that in order to be admitted. So drastic decline in the number of students taking it, and continue good scores for our students. So if we were going to pay for the non-writing version of 137 students who took it last year. So the complicated part is I would need to dedicate, I'm going to approximate about 4 hours worth of staff time to dig into those rosters to determine which of those 137 students were also free introduced lunch students. So I don't have a definitive answer for you. I have some parameters and then the amount of time it would take to get a definitive answer. And if the board wants us to spend that time doing that, we will gladly do that. But so if we were to pay for 137 students tests, that would cost $8,220. If we wanted to pay for all of the tests of the 316 students that were in the class of 2021, that would cost us $18,960. And again, I estimate or I approximate about 4 hours that it takes to determine of those 137 how many are free, just multiply that by 6. Sorry that I don't have that answer for you tonight.
Similarly, with the SAT again, they'll go more quickly. Test costs $55, 99 students took it from last year's class. To pay for those 99, it would have been $5,445. To pay for all seniors SAT, I don't know that all seniors would have needed to take it. That would have been $17,380, and because we actually have part of that data set, I would approximately take about 2 hours to complete that question.
What percentage of our students are on free, of our seniors are on free and reduced lunch?
Okay, so I'm gonna do this pretty quickly off the top of my head. We have, I think about, what is it, 320 seniors, I think. That is 4 short of 100, so I'm going to say about 30%.
Okay.
That's pretty rough math.
And we're about 30% in the high school, so, I mean, I can't imagine it changes that much, but I could get that information if we need it.
Thank you.
But anyway, if we take 30% of
Yeah,
8,220, then we're talking
right.
like $240.
Yeah.
Or 2,400 rather.
Yeah, so if I were to look at 30% of that $8,200,
We're
right,
talking
you're looking
about
at, yeah.
240,
Yeah,
$250.
2,500.
2,500.
Yeah, yep, and same for 30% of that $5,400 again. It's about $1,700.
Right. So I guess the thing I would say about the ACT and SAT is, given that it's no longer required for admission into Iowa universities, do you perceive that as a barrier to college for students?
I do not, no. They've made a permanent decision that will no longer. So in my opinion, the benefit of taking the ACT or the SAT, well, the ACT for admittance to our region institutions is scholarship, not admission. So I don't see the ACT as something that will be in the way of students getting into post-secondary opportunities.
Though
could prevent them from getting a scholarship.
Might need scholarships too.
Yeah, I mean,
Although I'll share from my work hat on for a minute. That is, the discussion on that is evolving since this change just happened, and knowing that many of our students are going to be coming in without the ACT and SAT, we can probably expect to see that shift over the next few years, that they won't, like, especially for those Iowa scholarships that are for the Iowa students, automatic scholarships, will probably have different sort of ways of qualifying for that.
I guess the AP test question, the calculation you did was based on the students that took the AP test last.
No, thank you for the question. To be really clear, the data, the numbers that I gave you for the ACT and the SAT were based upon approximation from last year's students who took the test. The number that I gave you for AP tests are the number of this year's students signed up for AP tests to be taken in May.
Okay.
So that is a this year real number. It's not a approximation.
Okay. And Chris, can you just refresh our memories that with the AP test, that would be something that we cannot pay for out of general fund, correct? Because it would not be benefiting every student? Or it would not be?
So I think there's a difference between the AP tests and the ACT and SAT, because the AP doesn't, well, I know they've changed the rules on the others for college admission. The AP tests are more part of the curriculum. So I do think as long as we paid for every student who wanted to take an AP test, yes, you could do that.
Or every student on free and reduced lunch. Would there be any problem with saying we only pay for students who are on free and reduced lunch to take the AP test?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
I think my real concern on that would be identification. I'm trying to think of how we would, because there's such a limited, school fee, there's a system of how we exempt school fees in general across the district. The AP tests, we haven't typically put those on Infinite Campus. I think your selection on that would be very identifying. I just think we'd have to think that one through on how we handled it. to not identify students as free and reduced.
You
which
mean
is-
not like putting a label on their ticket or a sticker on their test that says
Well,
free and
that-
reduced lunch student?
Or that people who aren't entitled to that information know that information.
Right, so there's very limited.
There's very few people in the district that are allowed to know who's free and reduced. I am the school food service director according to the state because we're outsourced, so I have that ability. But an average staff member cannot know that. So we just have to, I'm not saying it's impossible, I'm just saying we would have to work out a system so that those fees are not exempted at the classroom level.
Okay.
You're catching me off guard asking me that, so I haven't thought it through.
The way that AP tests are usually paid for is at the building level, and so we would have to figure out a way for kids to pay for their AP tests and have those then ordered through district office, through someone who has access. Like, for example, I don't have access to that list, I'm not supposed to, so that's a good thing. But someone who has access to that list would have to handle the ordering of AP tests.
So I think this is interesting. I mean, we have a motion on the floor about the item we need to go. I would suggest we talk about this more at a future meeting because I still have a concern where there's an underlying question here of if the district wanted to spend money to help students in a way that I think is based on an equity need, is this the place the district would say that money would have the most impact? And I think that's something we should really be talking about before we say, could we pay for this specific thing? Is this the thing that would be the highest on the priority list of what we would spend money on to have an impact? And I think that really fits in well with where the work session we're going to have later is going to go long-term is what is our equity plan? What's our plan for helping students that are free and reduced lunch, things like that? Because so let me be clear. I think this sounds like a great idea. I mean, like if there was a way to donate towards this, I would probably donate towards it. But for the district money, I would like to make sure this is part of a larger context of what do we really think is going to have the impact? So I don't think I'd be supportive of it from the district perspective until we know that and we can come down to that, right?
I do
That's
think
my
it's
point.
important for us to have a larger conversation, and I also think that the equity argument for this one seems pretty clear in terms of college admission for our students.
I guess I don't agree with that because I don't see that it impacts college admissions.
Or college, so I guess, yeah, you're right.
So I'm not sure I see it as a barrier. I would want to have a bigger conversation with people who maybe know more about that than I do, but it's not preventing anyone from going to college, so.
Yeah, and similarly, again, we're not going to go into this, but for example, in the past, things like this that have to do with like trade certifications are maybe more of a barrier because those actually are absolutely required and can become a barrier. But again, there's a scholarship issue like we're talking about. But I think all this is outside the scope of the motion we have
What we're
right
doing
now
right
and is
now,
something
yeah.
that really would need a
Great.
lot more thought and discussion. And so I would recommend we go back to the motion for this one and move this to something that.
Do I hear you
I'll
calling the
talk about
question, Dr. Bearbaum?
I was going to say, I call the question.
All right, it was moved by Lankitis, seconded by Winfrey, to approve the 2022-23 school fee schedule as presented. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Passes 7-0. Items from the board. I did not note any requests for staff. Well, I guess that's not true. So we're going to come back a little bit on that number 2, alternative number 2 on the school start times. And that is the only one that I have noted from the full board. Anything else?
There was a request that we bring back the issue on school fees, but I'm not clear that there's any staff time required on that. Just that we bring it back on the agenda.
Right, and I think, I mean, if I heard Director Beerbaum correctly, I'm wondering if that comes in through a larger discussion about equity and spending. Not that we come back to the specific, are we going to pay for the AP test?
From my perspective, that's where I'd put it is once we have our equity strategic plan developed, to then look at where could we maybe have significant return on investment if we put some money behind certain aspects of it. But I would expect that would be part of that plan anyway. The other alternative would be, it could come back to equity committee in some future committee meeting. I know we've got, with the equity strategic plan, we have quite a few things there. But I would probably just rely on board leadership to choose when that comes back and to work with the superintendent on that as it relates to everything else.
Okay. So we already discussed the fees on item number 1 here. So we'll also quickly go back to the activities admission fees. Is that you, Chris?
Well, I ran the data. So I simply ran a report through this year. I didn't try to run it for the last year because COVID impacted this so significantly. This just shows you what we've collected. Well, and because we weren't coding admission fees separately in the past, the state allows you to go into certain detail, but doesn't require you to go into certain detail. So in the past, athletic revenues have always gone into a 1790, which is a general activity revenue. Did I have my 3 minutes already? This year, in working with our new activities director, he wanted that split out so he could track that. So we just started tracking admission fees separately from like donations and fundraising. So this is just through this year. Now, what I will tell you is I can't tell you of this how much comes from an adult, how much comes from a student, how much comes from an AIM student versus other school students. I will tell you that any loss of revenue to especially the athletics would be significant. All of our athletics are underwater as it is. Director Fetters is trying very hard to work on that. So I know if I was in his shoes, I'd be concerned about any loss of revenue that's going to exacerbate that. I don't know how, except for tracking it for a year to get that data, because we're almost through the year this year. So again, I couldn't tell you of the $30,000 we collected for football, how much of that came from adults and how much came from students.
Well, I appreciate you bringing that back for us, Chris. Any other items? Oh, I'm sorry. I totally skipped right into items for the superintendent. So let's go back to.
I will only add one.
We real quick see if there's any other items from the board before we actually move into items from the superintendent. Okay, go ahead, Dr. Mason.
Well, it's my pleasure just to acknowledge that Dr. Lawson has been in the district a significant amount of time already and is working hard to understand the context and beginning that transition to be here, and we just appreciate that time that we are getting with him and his counsel as we prepare for a new year, July 1. So thank you for being here again, Dr. Lawson. And I think everybody else has covered all those other items. There we go.
Okay, looking at the board planning calendar, we do have a meeting next Monday that will also have a work session, and this will be the oft-mentioned work session with IASB. It's been rescheduled a couple of times, so fingers crossed we're able to make that one happen this time. I know that Tammy and her team are excited to be here, so we'll see everybody next week. Any comments or questions on the board planning calendar? All right, then we will take a 5-minute recess and we will move into our work session. We will also end our stream at this time, and after the work session, the only thing we will do is adjourn. We will not be taking any action.